All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to give everyone about 1 or 2 minutes to join, so feel free to go, grab some water, a snack, and we'll get started in about 90 seconds or so. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for this webinar and the discussion we're going to be having over the next hour or so. So let's go ahead and kick off things. All right, well, let's go ahead and start with a round of introductions. So hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran. I'm our content manager here at CourseDog. So all things research and content related. Really excited to be speaking with you all today, and I'll go ahead and kick it over to Lucy now.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy. I am a product manager here at CourseDog, and I focus specifically on our curriculum and catalog solutions. So spend all day thinking curriculum management and catalog management. Awesome. Thanks, Bridget. So before we dive into things, I want to quickly provide an overview of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to begin by talking about current trends we here at CourseDog are seeing that are challenging to institutions to more quickly adapt and change their curriculum. After that, we'll talk about some of the barriers that exist to those updates and what's preventing institutions from being able to quickly and effectively propose, review, and approve new curriculum. Finally, we're going to talk about practices institutions can adopt to help them more quickly meet student and employer demands for relevant and differentiated curriculum. And as part of that, we'll talk about what this means for curricular processes, for the catalog, and more. Of course, we're going to leave time at the end for some questions, but if you have any questions for myself or Bridget throughout the presentation, feel free to submit them in the chat or in the Q&A function that you can find right there at the bottom of your screen. During the session, we're also going to be conducting a few polls. We're looking forward through those to getting your perspectives on this topic and learning more about how scheduling practices and curricular practices impact students at your institution. So before we get into our first section, I wanted to quickly set the stage and make sure we're all on the same page about what we're talking about when we refer to managing and changing curriculum. For the context of our discussion today, I'll share that when I think about managing curricular changes at an institution, I largely think of it in two major buckets. So first, keeping a curriculum inventory. I often hear from administrators that faculty and staff don't know how or where to find the most recent and accurate list of courses and programs that are offered at an institution. A faculty member might even go, and pull a paper volume off a shelf that's just in some odd hallway to look up a certain course. However, I think we can all agree that that printed book is probably from several years ago and no longer contains the most updated information. In that second bucket, we'll be talking about all the processes that go into making changes to curriculum, whether this is proposing a new course or program or modifying an existing course or program. To make these changes happen, faculty and staff have to go through the process of proposing, reviewing, approving, and then publishing the new curriculum. So now that we're hopefully on the same page, let's move on into our main topics for the day. We're going to begin today, as I shared, by looking at some of the factors that make it even more critical for institutions to be able to keep their curriculum relevant to the needs of students and employers. We'll look at the pace that skills are changing in the labor market, how student preferences are changing, and new pressures that institutions face when it comes to their curriculum. You'll see on the slide a quote here, and I really love this quote by Dr. Kara Monroe, who is the former provost at Ivy Tech Community College in Indiana. We here at CourseDog, have talked with Kara a lot about the importance of keeping curriculum relevant particularly at institutions like hers in the 2-year space that are really closely aligned with the local community and workforce. Kara thinks about it such that her curriculum is her product catalog. This is what they sell to students, employers, the state, and even boards of directors or trustees. And this is true for all institutions. While I know that a lot of us are hesitant to think of the value of higher education as a product, this is how many external stakeholders do see it. And so let's take a look at some of the forces that inform curriculum development. I think when many folks think about changing and updating the curriculum, they think about changing skills in the workforce. And that's largely for good reason. Lightcast recently put out a report that highlights some really fascinating information about the rate at which skills are changing across the labor market. Lightcast found during their analysis that since 2016, so not so long ago, there was a 37% change in skills used in job postings. So what this means is that about a third of any given job posting looked different today than 5 to 6 years ago. They also found that 20%, or 1 in 5, of these skills listed in the job posting was entirely new to the job posting compared to the same job posting in 2016. This rate of change is pretty interesting when you're thinking about how programs and courses are or aren't changing within that same time period.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thanks for sharing that, Lucy. And I think another thing that I think about a lot is that, these changes really aren't limited to just one particular sector. I think when a lot of us thinking about changing skills, we immediately think about, software developers learning new programming languages or data scientists finding new ways to analyze data. And while this is definitely true, they certainly aren't the only ones who are learning new skills and adapting to changing expectations and needs. The same light class study analyzed the percentage change between 2016 and 2021 of the top 20 skills by different fields. They found that 33% of the top requested skills for IT professionals changed during that time period. However, the percentage change was the same or greater for 5 of the other 8 fields that they highlighted. So, for example, 35% of the top 20 skills requested for HR professionals also changed during that same time period. And, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can slice and dice this data, but overall, it does point to the fact that skills are broadly changing across the labor market and not just in certain sectors. You'll see here at the bottom of the slide here, a quote from one of our partners, Dr. Jill Wright, and she's the former AVP of Accreditation Assessment and Academic Services at Illinois Central College. She noted that oftentimes by the time a new program is launched, it's already too late. An institution, may realize a couple of years after the fact that there's a new labor market trend and their programs need to be modified to meet this trend. Then it takes 1 or 2 years to actually, go through all of the motions of suggesting, modifying, and implementing all of that updated curriculum. And, by that time, job requirements have already changed again. And of course, I do acknowledge that there are some aspects of the process that are out of your control, like, waiting for board approval or from accreditation bodies. But her point is that institutions should be doing everything in their power to, tighten up their timelines and make sure that internally they're not prolonging the approval process any longer than they have to. We also know that changes in the job market will impact student demand. Whether we like to admit it or not, getting a good job is consistently one of the top reasons that students choose to enroll in a post-secondary program. And the motivation to find a good job doesn't just impact students' intentions to enroll in higher ed, but also what program they ultimately end up going into. You can see here the trend lines on this slide show the number of degrees conferred between 2009, 2010, and 2018, 2019 based on program or area. Certain programs like those in the health professions and engineering have been consistently climbing, while other areas such as social science and history have seen a decline in the number of degrees conferred. Of course, these are macro trends and don't take into account certain geographic trends or trends within each field. But I do think that they paint a pretty clear picture that there is a shift that's occurring. I'll also note, due to the notoriously slow reporting by iPads, this data doesn't show trends from the past few years or how the pandemic might have impacted student program choice. So we could probably, spend all day talking about iPads data. Sure, none of you want to, so we won't. Um, but let's look at how this plays out with prospective students when it comes to navigating academic offerings. Accessing information about degrees and programs is one of the most important things that prospective students care about. So, in a survey by College Pulse, they asked 2,000 current students across around 100 institutions about what factors influenced them to attend their current institution. 65% of these surveyed students reported that the institution offering their major or program of interest was a major factor when it came into their decision to attend their current institution. Offering their program or major of interest was also one of the top two reasons students chose their institution. And of course, career prospects was another major contributor when it came to students' decisions. Career prospects was the third most important factor that that same survey found. However, I do think it's interesting when you look at some other survey data, they found that a third of students are unsure which program aligns with their career path. And this is pretty problematic when you think about it. And I think it's definitely an opportunity for institutions to, think more closely about how they can tie their academic programs to career information in the catalog and other public sources of information that prospective students are consulting. And finally, I want to touch on, what this means for transfer students. The survey I was just talking about found that nearly 2/3 of transfer students at four-year institutions reported that they could have used more advice on which courses are eligible for transfer credit. So definitely, lots of decisions, lots of information for students to navigate. So let's talk a little bit more about why students might not be able to access the right curricular information to, make those informed decisions. So I think it's not news to any of us here, but unfortunately, current processes don't always support what student needs look like today. And we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at why that might be the case. We'll look at where some of these breakdowns occur in processes and why they're happening. And specifically, we'll look at how the program review process plays into this and how students are actually able to access, newly updated curriculum. Beyond the frustration that administrators face when it comes to managing curricular changes, more importantly, students are also impacted by these inefficient processes. We asked higher ed leaders in a university business survey how inefficiencies in academic operations impact students on their campus. And curriculum-related items ranked as the #1 impact on students. 6 out of 10 respondents reported that students at their institutions were unaware of curriculum changes that might impact them. I think this is pretty concerning when you think about the fact that curriculum requirements determine which courses students are registering for and whether they've met the right requirements for completion. Respondents also noted that curriculum changes aren't always accurately reflected on program maps, the website, or other student-facing sources. And similarly, the catalog doesn't always reflect the most accurate course offerings, requirements, and other policies. So we know that, both administrators and students are impacted by these inefficient processes. But I think next comes the question, where are these breakdowns actually occurring? I know that the curriculum process varies institution to institution, but on this slide here, we sketched out an example of the number of steps a curricular change has to move through to get approved. You'll see in this case, once a curriculum change is proposed, it has to go through 8 steps internally before it can even begin the external review process. That's 8 opportunities for the proposed change to get stuck at a certain step or delayed. And without a centralized system or accountability, it's really no wonder that oftentimes it takes so long for these curriculum changes to get moved through the process and then approved. And as I was saying earlier, I know that some people will push back and, point to those external processes like state approvals, accreditation, financial aid, all of that. And that's certainly true. But I was talking with one of our partners, and, when I brought this up, she told me, yes, this is true. There are all these external processes, but the part that I can own is the part inside my institution. And I want to make that as short and as streamlined and efficient as possible because it involves a lot of people within an institution.
Yeah, really good points, Bridget. And as we all know, the flip side of this is that the catalog is heavily tied to curriculum and any new changes that might be made. And while 33% of institutions only allow course changes once a year, and 47 only allow program changes, 47%, I should say, only allow program changes once a year, that means that more than half of institutions are allowing course and program changes more than once a year. Among those, almost half allow unlimited course changes each year. And while it's wonderful to continually innovate the curriculum and align it with current student and employer needs, in practice, what does this mean when it comes to publishing the catalog and informing students of change? For me, I think this points to a major need for institutions to examine how the curriculum and catalog processes are really intertwined to make sure that students are being served well through those processes. So we've just spent some time talking about how the catalog and curriculum changes are linked, and would love to hear from you about how you're seeing this play out on your campus. You'll see a poll on your screen, and please select how your institution approaches these two processes. We've launched the poll and we'll leave it open for a little bit less than 60 seconds. And I know I think I'm probably somewhat biased on this, Bridget, because I spend my whole day in a linked curriculum catalog world, but I'm very curious to see how other folks are thinking of it.
Yes, I completely agree. I always love these polls. They're, one of my favorite parts of these webinars. So yeah, if you haven't had a chance, go ahead and select your answer, and we'll close this one shortly.
Yeah, we'll give it perfect. Alrighty, so looks like this is interesting. Nearly a 50-50 split here between the curriculum changes and processes being aligned with catalog publishing. For me, I think that is a bit surprising in that it's almost so high that they're linked. I know that can be, as you just shared on your flow chart, a lot of pieces to wrangle to get in time with the catalog publishing. So I think that speaks really highly to a lot of the work that's being done. And for those institutions that aren't linked, would love to learn more kind of about the drivers there and what that process is like. Anything stand out to you, Bridget?
No, I agree with that. And, I think also, the data, Lucy, you just shared about the fact that so many institutions do allow course and program changes multiple, if not unlimited times a year. That would, I think, almost make it impossible to align it with, your catalog being published, once, twice a year. So definitely some food for thought for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I'd like to look now at how our poll results compare to a survey that we asked institutions about when they typically publish the catalog. And of course, all of us want to ensure that students always have the most up-to-date and accurate information, but surprisingly, this doesn't always occur. So if we consider the timing of academic matriculation on a traditional admission cycle, most students have already admitted and enrolled at an institution by the time a catalog is published in late summer or early fall. And indeed, a recent survey by ACRO on academic operations found that 54% of institutions do not have an approved catalog before students are recruited and admitted to that very same catalog year. And we can see that the timeline might not be the only reason the catalog isn't ready in time for students. So I'd like to take a closer look at the connection between curriculum and the catalog. Ideally, once new curricular offerings are approved, those offerings are then entered into the newest version of the catalog. That new catalog is then published and students are able to see the new offerings. And faculty and staff, as we know, also use the catalog to access and evaluate offerings, which sounds, I think, simple on paper, right? But as I'm sure most of us know, it's almost never that simple. In fact, too often, newly approved offerings sit in limbo for long periods of time. This is some of that related to some of that delay Bridget was talking about before getting published into the catalog. And this goes back to the transparency aspect as well. When folks don't know what stage the curriculum change is in, and if it's been approved yet, that can cause slowdowns. In other cases, the curriculum process might not line up with when the catalog is published. This is bound to happen when the catalog is often more regulated than the curricular change process, and as we just saw in the survey results we discussed. Given this, it's really no wonder that curricular changes don't always line up with when it needs to be published to the catalog. As a result, there might not be enough time between publishing the catalog and advertising new offerings to students so that they're then able to engage in discovery and enrollment.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. And I think a lot of what you were just talking about with the catalog is also really true when you think about our, curriculum processes that many institutions are using. And I think there are a couple of different challenges that really come to mind for me. And the first one being transparency and accountability. So with curricular changes moving through, paper forms, emails, spreadsheets, often many other tools, the faculty and staff that submitted that original curricular change often don't know what stage of the approval process it's actually in. And this isn't only frustrating, but also prevents faculty from knowing who to reach out to and what stage that change is in. The second and third challenges here are pretty closely linked. So as we mentioned earlier, curricular changes can often take a year or two. And changes span extended periods of time in each stage, which lengthens the overall time to decision. This lengthy process is often due to deadline challenges that aren't really enforceable and difficult to keep track of. And due to the lack of transparency and different methods of moving curricular changes from one step to the next, no one knows how long changes have been in each stage and when they're really supposed to move on to the next. So as you can see, these challenges, I think, really feed into each other and unfortunately can sometimes lead to almost this vicious cycle that lacks accountability and drags out the whole process. So we're going to open another poll here. Would love to learn from you all about where you're currently seeing inefficiencies in your curricular approval process right now at your school. So again, we'll leave it open for about 60 seconds or so if you all want to go ahead and select away here. Okay, I see some responses coming in, which is great. We'll leave it open for another 15, 20 seconds for any late stragglers here. All right, we can probably go ahead and close the poll now and share those results. Okay, pretty interesting. Okay, so the top one coming in here, deadlines are not established and or enforced. Yep, that was a big one. The second coming in here, difficult to input newly approved curriculum into the SIS and our catalog. Yep, we hear that a lot. I'm sure Lucy has some thoughts on that because she's working with our partners pretty much every day on that. So Lucy, would love to get your perspective here.
I think, you said it really well, Bridget. These results are interesting, but I'm not necessarily surprised. And in my mind, I'm wondering how much numbers kind of 2 and 3 are really intertwined. So this difficulty in putting a newly approved curriculum into the SIS or the catalog seems to go hand in hand in many instances with the fact that these are highly manual and highly paper-based processes that really require a lot of lift in person to accomplish. So those seem intrinsically linked to me.
Yes, and I see we have a comment in the chat here from Kristen. Yeah, really good point. As a community college system, you often have to wait for state approval before getting the codes to actually input that program into the SIS. So yes, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and move on here to everyone's favorite topic, program reviews. I know, for being honest, this is often a pretty unpleasant process for most folks. They're often a pretty large burden to conduct, and oftentimes folks on campus view them as punitive rather than as an opportunity for growth. And aside from that, though, I think that the way that they're actually conducted doesn't often accomplish the outcomes that we actually intend for. So to start, oftentimes they happen pretty infrequently. At some institutions, they can be as far apart as 5 to 10 years. And this means that realistically, these reviews aren't keeping up with the pace of student and employer expectations. Aside from the frequency, the process itself can also sometimes be flawed. And program reviews may be staggered, so performance across programs really can't be compared at the same time. And this prevents institutions from getting a holistic view of program performance and evaluate what this means for the curriculum change process. And I think also it comes to no surprise to many of us that metrics are often subjective and vary across programs. So, different programs are being judged differently based on varying standards. And at its worst, when metrics are difficult to access, programs are evaluated based on vague qualitative metrics. This isn't helpful for anyone, so a more frequent, less arduous, and more objective evaluation is often needed. Okay, great. Well, we're going to get into our final section here now before we move into Q&A, but we're going to talk about some of the practices that hopefully you all can implement to address some of the challenges that we've discussed today. So we'll first look at the importance of establishing consistency across where curricular offerings are displayed. And next, we'll talk about the importance of integrating the curriculum process and making sure that these processes really feed into each other. So as we've discussed, curricular offerings don't live in a vacuum, and they certainly don't just live in one place. I think the catalog is the first place many of us think of when we think about where we house our curricular offerings and program maps. And the catalog represents the public contract between the institution and the student for the requirements and policies that students will have to follow to successfully complete their program. This is important, but there are also a couple of other places students go to access course and program information. The website's a big one. I think just like many of us, students are more likely to turn to a search engine or Google when they're looking to navigate for what they're looking for. It's very rare that a student's going to start at the institution's homepage and go click through all the different menus trying to find what they're looking for. And the website also serves as an advertising tool for prospective students considering your institution and potential programs. Finally, if your institution uses a student degree planner, this is where students go to plan their schedule for upcoming terms. This is where they can chart out courses and create a plan for what makes sense for their individual circumstances. It's really key that all three of these mediums present the same information to prevent confusion and make sure students don't get off track or take unproductive credits. When I was originally creating this presentation, I was going to title this Key Features to Stand Out. But I think at this point, they're not even features to stand out, but really features to just meet the expectations that students have for anything online that they're going to be engaging with. Like we just mentioned earlier, students will typically turn to a search engine first. So your catalog and other associated pages should be search engine optimized or SEO optimized. So your catalog will be the top results when students Google what they're looking for. It should also load quickly. I don't know about you all, but personally, if I go on a website and it doesn't load after a couple of seconds, I usually get annoyed and X out of it after just a couple of seconds. So I'm sure many of your students are also doing that. And if they can't initially find it, on, say, the right catalog page, they might turn somewhere else to find that information that they need. And of course, the catalog should be easily searchable and mobile friendly. Accessibility is another key feature that is often overlooked, and I always like to call out, especially when a record number of students are coming to college with a disability. We need to make sure that they can easily access the information they need, especially since your website and catalog might be one of the first places that they're actually interacting with your institution. I think we all have to ask ourselves, what will their perception be of inclusion at your institution if they aren't even able to navigate your catalog? Logical, consistent navigation is another area that seems pretty simple, but surprisingly isn't always done in practice. So I think there are a couple of questions that can kind of help guide you here, such as, does the navigation bar at the top or on the side always remain the same, no matter what page a student is clicking on? Are they 3 clicks deep into the catalog and does all of a sudden the format change? Or, does it look the same? Is it a nice, consistent experience? And the final one I'll point out here is mixed mediums. As I said, I'm Xing out of a web page after 2 seconds if it doesn't load. Similarly, students with shorter attention spans might not want to read through huge blocks of text. So I think it's important to think about, are you using visually appealing colors, graphics or pictures to help break up that text? Are you including short videos or maybe some calls to action that can encourage prospective students to request information? All of these can really help draw students in and encourage them to engage with your institution. All right, and I will turn it over to Lucy now.
Awesome. Thanks, Bridget. I definitely felt seen when you talked about Xing out of a website that didn't load. I've definitely done that. But as part of all of this, I think it's really important to think about how curriculum changes and the catalog are interconnected. It's obviously true that curriculum can live in multiple places, all of which are accessible to students. And the same could be said for how a curriculum manifests itself across an institution. So proposing a curricular change is really just the first stage in that life cycle. We've spent a lot of time talking about this today and what it takes to actually propose, evaluate, and approve new curricular offerings. Of course, it doesn't stop there though. Once new curricular offerings are approved, it needs to be pushed into the newest version of the catalog so students, faculty, and staff can all access it. The registrar's office and any department schedulers also need access to the most up-to-date curriculum to know which courses to schedule so students can access and enroll in the newly offered courses or newly offered programs. And then from there, the new curricular offerings should hopefully be evaluated at regular intervals to monitor success and what, if anything, needs to be changed. And then once a needed change is identified, the whole thing starts over again with the curricular change process. So unsurprisingly, this amount of coordination can lead to breakdowns in process beyond just reviewing and approving curricular changes. We've talked about the stages curriculum moves through, so I'd love to hear from you all. Where does your curricular change process most frequently break down? We've gone ahead and launched this poll here. And please answer with what feels most right to you.
Yes, I know we made this one single choice, so hoping for folks to select, which one is, most seen, most felt at their institution, because I know for many folks, probably, all of these or most of them could be equivalent, or I'm sorry, could be relevant in some situations.
Absolutely. That's a good call out, Bridget.
And this is our final poll today. So really looking forward to getting everyone's input here.
Yeah, I'm trying to guess in my head what I think the results will be, but we'll see. Awesome. So where do curricular change processes most frequently break down? It looks like most folks were saying keeping the curriculum review and approval moving along quickly, or evaluating the performance of newly launched curriculum, with certainly some some representation in the other two areas as well. I feel like we've talked relatively extensively about that first one, keeping curriculum review and approval moving along, and kind of the points at which that can happen. I'm especially, I guess, eager to dive in future times to this question of how are we evaluating the performance of newly launched curriculum in a way that feels effective and efficient. Yeah, anything stand out to you, Bridget?
Yeah, I think something that caught my eye here is, the lower percentage of folks that said scheduling the correct number of sections for newly launched courses. I think to some extent, that's good news that folks feel like they can pretty accurately guess, how many sections they need to be scheduling there. So I think that that's exciting to me, and would love to kind of learn more from folks on the line about how they're able to do this well, what data sources are they using, to be able to correctly, anticipate that. Because I think, kudos to everyone here, because that can certainly be a difficult one, I know.
Absolutely. I know we've seen institutions struggle with that. That's important to know. So,
All right.
oh, go for it. Okay.
Yes.
With all of that said, I want to give a real quick overview of how we here at CourseDog are helping institutions maintain a single source of truth and optimize the curriculum process. And after that, really excited to move into some of your questions. Broadly, CourseDog provides a single SIS integration, and that single integration is able to expand transparency around curriculum review processes, as well as being a really flexible process. So has client-defined forms and approval workflows that are then automated such that some of those timing breakdowns are hopefully minimized. As Bridget said, accessibility is really important in the catalog, and it's certainly important for some internal focuses as well. So we work really to have a modern user experience to improve change management, adoption, and accessibility. And finally, on the catalog side of things, we think a lot about how to build a modern and compliant catalog for both prospective students as well as the other stakeholders for whom the catalog is really important, whether that's faculty, advisors, or even external accreditation or governing bodies. As part of that, there is comparable kind of workflow and change management available through the catalog. And we also target being really SEO friendly. So how are we ensuring that when that student does go to the Google search, that they're going to find the information that they need? And of course, you can always visit CourseDog.com to chat more, or if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucy. Well, I think we can go ahead and move into Q&A now. So feel free to submit any questions that you might have through either the chat function or the Q&A function. Happy to answer any and all questions, whether they're related to the presentation, CourseDog, anything else that is coming to mind. So we'll give folks a little bit to chat in any questions they have into the Q&A, and then we'll take them. All right, I am seeing one question here in the Q&A, and this individual is asking about, where do we find that most schools struggle with their catalog, and what are some recommendations that we frequently give to make the catalog more user-friendly? Lucy, I know you spent a lot of time thinking about this, so I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, that's certainly not an uncommon question, actually, and I think you actually touched on some of the key areas that we tend to drill in with our implementation team when this first question of navigability comes up. So what's particularly coming to mind here is, how is the catalog structured in terms of navigation? I think for a lot of us who may be matriculated into a true 1,000+ page PDF, that is how we see some catalogs even being digitized, to that point of it's really just a list of pages. It can be hard to parse through if I'm looking for tuition policies, I could end up on the financial aid page, or I could end up on the bursars page. And it can be really a maze of kind of insider baseball to try to figure out how to navigate that. So one of the first things we work with institutions is thinking about, okay, kind of what are these overarching categories of resources? How are we breaking those down into subcategories that are intuitive, easy to navigate? And if there's nuance, how are we calling out that nuance early and often on the page to make sure that not only is it visible in the navigation, but it's also going to surface in any search result. So for an institution who's looking to streamline their catalog, I personally really recommend starting with that navigation aspect and thinking, if, maybe if I don't know what articulation agreement means, but I know I'm sort of looking for transfer stuff, can I still find what I'm looking for?
Yeah, that's super helpful, Lucy. And I think the navigation point is a really good one. In a former life, I used to evaluate institutions' websites and particularly program pages. And I would say that the vast majority did not meet all of the check marks for when we were going through the navigability of the website. I found that, on a lot of institutions, the, catalog homepage might be beautiful, everything's working, great navigation, but you click a few steps deeper into it, and that's where you start seeing those inconsistencies, and it starts to become a little more unclear about where exactly you should be going next.
Mhm. Yeah, I almost would liken it to, in some instances, if you were to open up your phone and on the first page, all the apps are in a neat little grid, but you swipe 2 or 3 over and they're stacked over each other a bit haphazard. That's a really good point, Bridget. Awesome. I'm peeking through the Q&A here. Among these questions, are there any specific ones you would want to answer, Bridget?
Yeah, I am seeing one question here that I think is pretty interesting. So this person noted that at their institution, they use paper copies for things like advising, planning, curriculum review. And they're a big part of their process, but there's been skepticism in the past about moving to digital workflows. And they're hoping we could share how other schools have successfully moved to digital workflows.
Yeah, that's a good question. As far as specific examples, we absolutely have some, and I'm sure the team can reach out and share those. Broadly, I think, I always like to start with the fact that it's an acknowledgement that moving from anything that's, paper process, manila interoffice mail envelopes to digital, does take work on the team. And then what we see is that work pays off so quickly, which is always really exciting for us. I think that some of the main, I'll say main steps to that digitization are, one, kind of finding, where is your data stored? Some folks have everything in the SIS, but are still using interoffice mail. Some folks have it on, tenured professors' Excel sheet. Some folks are a mix of both. So really doing a sort of an early audit of your data and where that information is can be a great first step to digitization.
Yes, absolutely. I'm seeing another question here, Lucy, in the Q&A about program review and the fact that, gathering fresh data can really be a challenge. So when, data is given for review, it's often, a year old at best. And after that review, when the actual program review is published, the data is now 2 years old. So looking to keep pace, like what are some other data points that this institution could be using in their review? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think this is a really good question, and definitely a tough one. I spent some time in a former job helping institutions look at that labor market data, and you're right. Oftentimes, a lot of those public sources, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, unfortunately, it's not updated every year, so that is a challenging one. One place that I always like to call out is thinking about any of your employer partners. I think specifically if you have, industry specific programs and say, engineering or business where you have employer advisors maybe that your faculty meet with, or, they help advise. they can often be great points to turn to because they'll probably have the latest information about, what's going on in the field and what skills are really in demand. So I would definitely highlight reaching out to any of those folks in your network. But Lucy, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think that's a great point, and it did. I was thinking back to when kind of the new 5-year BLS data set would come out. It's very exciting. I'm thinking too from the institutional side, kind of what the data is there. I might expect that to be, in some instances, a bit of a slower process to gather as well, and hard to keep that really future oriented. And what comes to mind for me is really leveraging, if you're able, any information that you have on students' kind of anticipated pathways. So, maybe your current students are, you know, in one set of courses and you understand that they've declared XYZ degree, but these kind of newly matriculated students being able to look at where they're headed in their pathway as best you can to help inform, okay, we have 10% more healthcare majors than usual. How can we update those programmatic offerings to support that larger enrollment? Or maybe we're seeing a decline in enrollment in other areas and we can work to be more efficient across those. So anything you can leverage from the student planning point of view, as far as some of those inferred pathways, as you start to think about where your students are headed, I think can help keep that data really fresh and interesting.
Absolutely. I'm seeing another question here about if our curriculum management integrates with other vendor catalog software. I'm not the product expert here, so I will let Lucy answer that, knowing that it might be difficult to answer, without knowing the specifics.
Yeah, it is. I'm always hesitant to answer kind of specific questions like that, but because so much can be based on really unique technical infrastructure. What I can say is that here at CourseDog, we have relatively open APIs, and we do see folks, iframing some information into other parts of their website or their broader kind of content management system. So, happy to evaluate a specific tech stack in more depth, but at the surface, I would say typically we can do that in some regard.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions in here yet. So I know we still have a couple more minutes left. So if you have any questions left for us, feel free to put that into the chat or Q&A. But if not, we can probably give folks a little time back in their day. We did want to close off with one final question here, just for our own internal information. If you just want to go and select yes or no, we're not offended either way. And then I think we can probably finish things up.
Perfect. Thanks, Bridget.
All right, well, we'll leave this open for just a little bit longer, but I think we can go ahead and start to wrap things up here. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that's joined us today. I think we've really enjoyed this discussion, particularly in the Q&A, hearing from you all in the poll questions. So I hope everyone else enjoyed the discussion, and hopefully you can go maybe take a quick walk, get a snack before your next meeting starts.
Perfect.